I was impressed by your loyalty and your ideological strength, but your courage to be 3 feet away from someone and to ask them a question that could put them against you for the rest of your life, but the truth is too important, that is the rarest commodity in a journalist, and it's why we love you, Keean. Keean Bexte.
So I drove up from Calgary this morning because I had to go to the University of Alberta to deliver our petition that 90,000 people signed to Ron McLean. He's the host of Hockey Night Canada, and he didn't stand up for his pal, Don Cherry. So I admit I'm a little bit unprepared for the 6 minutes because I spent the whole day trying not to get thrown out of the University of Alberta while I delivered it. Thankfully, it all worked out, and I got the petition to Ron McLean and he accepted it. He was professional about it. His wife, however, was not. So I encourage you to check out that video that we're going to be posting tomorrow because she is a firecracker. Now, to WEXIT, I wouldn't call myself a Canadian first. I'd call myself an Albertan first. And it all stems back to about 2000. I was 5 years old and I was watching the federal election with my mom and dad and my brother. And we were watching the election, the results were coming in, and they were coming in, and my dad turned off the TV, and it was before anything was announced, and I thought that was a little peculiar. I was interested. I was in kindergarten, and it was cool. We were going to see who was going to be our next prime minister. That's interesting. Didn't understand the difference between liberals and conservatives back then, but what I did know is my dad was really upset, and this was when Jean Chrétien was elected for second majority government. He said that, well, it doesn't really matter what happens anymore, Keean, because the East has decided. The East has decided your government. And I took that to heart because, we can talk about oil and gas these days and pipelines and all the carbon tax, but, there's serious structural problems in Canada that extend beyond that. We have a severe and structural lack of representation in the country. I'm going to read you off some numbers. Just scroll down here. And actually, just before I go into this, by raising hands, how many of you speak French? Okay, so I'd say that's about 5% of the room. So when I talk about the severe lack of representation that we have, the structural lack of representation, guess how many senators we have? Someone call it out. Alberta specifically. Of course you know. Mr. Downing. Yeah, there's 6. And together, Quebec and Ontario, well, they have 48 senators. And the Senate, by definition, is supposed to be addressing regional representation. That's what they do. But for some reason, Alberta doesn't deserve that representation. Saskatchewan doesn't deserve it either. When you look at the prime ministers of this country, guess how many are from Alberta? One. Stephen Harper, no, it is a little bit more than that. We also had Joe Clark, and I'm not sure that's a claim to fame. But we had 3. 2 of them were from Saskatchewan, and a lot more were from Quebec and Ontario. I think it's somewhere around 17, actually it is 17 from Quebec and Ontario. Does that sound fair to you? Do you see yourself reflected in the government of Canada? Even when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister, and I give him credit for all he did for Canada on the international stage, Alberta was by and large forgotten. It was forgotten by Stephen Harper, it was forgotten by Justin Trudeau. Literally, it was forgotten by Justin Trudeau on the 150th, the sesquicentennial anniversary of this country. It was forgotten. We just weren't a part of Confederation, and I think that slip was very genuine. I think that it wasn't that he was trying to stick a knife in our gut or rub salt in our wounds. Justin Trudeau does not consider you to be Canadian. You're deplorable, or you're a basket of deplorables is what you and I are. I don't think that's fair. Now, as a reporter, I usually try to not take positions, and I'm going to try and live by that rule right now. But what I will say is my experience in reporting on this issue. It was almost a year now. Justin Trudeau's birthday is December 25th. So it probably adds to his Messiah complex. He thinks he is Jesus Christ. But I had this opportunity. I went to Chinook Mall in Calgary to interview some people and asked them if they would wish their dear beloved Prime Minister a happy birthday. And we posted on Christmas. And I was quite moved that night because not only was I very pleased with the response that I got, as I expected. Most people were, I got more people flipping me the bird actually than they did say happy birthday. But what I did get in that night, someone was leaving the mall with their newborn kid, and I suppose they had another kid as well, just wasn't there. It was a mother who was shopping for her children for Christmas. And I was asking her if she wished Just True a happy birthday, and the conversation kind of meandered towards, the state of Alberta. And it brought her to tears because she couldn't provide birthday presents like she thought she could on her way to the mall that morning. She couldn't get the gifts that she wanted to get her kids because the prices were just too high. And her husband, wherever he was employed, wasn't employed anymore. And she was heartbroken, and she was brought to tears in front of my camera. Now, we didn't publish that out of respect for her, but it moved me. We have a province full of people who are not seeing themselves in Canada. They're not in a position where they can provide for their family. That means something needs to change. I interviewed someone at the Freedom Talk, Danny Hozak, I think is here, who hosted it last weekend, and someone put it really well. They said, the status quo has got to go. And I agree with that sentiment. That's what encapsulates my position on this, because the status quo is not working for us. It's not working for Saskatchewan either, as far as I understand it. Now, I asked you all, how many of you speak French? About 5% of you said you do. And I was also talking about the structural lack of representation that we have in this country. And it's not just in our elected positions. The government is largely run by the bureaucracy, and politicians have not as much say as I think a lot of people think that they have. When you look at the people that make up our bureaucracy and make up parliamentary officers, so that's the Auditor General, the Chief Electoral Officer, the official languages, Ethics Commissioner, all that kind of stuff, there's some requirements. They have to be bilingual. So by the rules that the rest of Canada has decided, be it Pierre Trudeau all the way up to Jean Chrétien himself, when he supported the Bilingualism Act, he said that 95% of the people in this room do not have a right to be an officer of parliament. I think that's egregious. Maybe some of you don't ever think that that was going to be a career target for you, but I think that every Canadian should be able to see themselves in their government, be it in Langevin Block at the Prime Minister's office, all the way to the Ethics Commissioner. I think that the Ethics Commissioner, actually, if I have my data right, not a single one of them has been educated outside of Quebec. Not a single one. Most of them, in fact, have been born in Montreal. I think that that's egregious. That's where SNC-Lavalin is headquartered, actually, and you can see why Justin Trudeau gets so much sympathetic decisions. He's fined a couple $100 whenever he breaks ethics laws. And it's because this bilingualism requirement in our government is dead set against Alberta, and it's dead set against you, because it prioritizes Quebecers and maybe New Brunswickers, the people who actually are bilingual. It prioritizes them over you because apparently you are not as good Canadians. You do not deserve to represent yourself or hold the government accountable as an officer of parliament just because you don't speak French. I think that's egregious. Now, I think I probably am a bit over time, and hopefully I haven't been rambling too much. As I said, I wasn't really prepared for this, but I have a few questions that I want to answer personally before I would support a separatist movement. And those questions are mainly logistical. As I understand it, back during the referendum in Quebec, the military very quietly pulled all of the CFA teams out of the province just before the vote because they didn't want to have anything fishy going on there with the military jets. And I want to know what's going to happen to, if Alberta does separate, what's going to happen to our defense? Are we going to have a military? What will happen to Canadian military bases that are on our soil? What will happen to the servicemen? Will they be shipped out? I don't know. I want to answer that. I also want to know what's going to happen to our national parks. I'm sure that the Canadians, the East, they're going to be vindictive. If we try to separate, they will not make it easy. And I want to keep Banff. I love Banff. I think you all want to keep Banff and Jasper as well. So I want to know what will happen there. I want to know what will happen to our economy. I want to know if we're going to stay on the Canadian dollar, if we'll use the American dollar, perhaps Bitcoin. I would want to know. I would be happy to stay on the Canadian dollar, actually. I was talking to my econ professor back from the University of Calgary. I got a degree in econ and science. And my econ professor said, well, Keean, if we separate, the best way to stick it to the east would be to stay on the Canadian dollar. You might remember back in 2008 when we were selling bitumen like crazy and Americans were buying it like crazy. They would exchange American dollars and buy Canadian dollars so that they could purchase our oil, and that's what drove up our currency so that we were above par back in 2008, 2009. And the East hated it. They hated it because their manufacturing was being crippled. I would love to stay on the Canadian dollar for that reason. So I'll leave it at that. I'm interested to hear your questions. I'm interested to hear what kind of discussion we can have tonight, because I agree with what Ezra said. You know, the East really does hate us. They really hate Alberta, and the Eastern companies who run the media, they hate us as well. They do not stand anything to benefit for having restlessness in Alberta and wanting Albertans wanting to leave. In fact, actually, I'm quite happy to say, I was going to do a story on it if I wasn't reporting on the Toronto plane today, but the Toronto Star is pulling out of their Alberta outposts here today. They're you're actually on my way to Edmonton, and boy, did that just put a skip in my step. But as I understand it, Ezra sent them a few tweets offering them to send in their resumes in case these journalists wanted to try. He was met with quite salty responses, but the offer was there. Anyways, I'll get back to Ezra. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming here today.
Thanks, Keean. I hope Professor Cooper makes it, and I know that it's only because of the weather that he's not here, because I'm getting updates from that. I got updates from that flight on my email, and it was later. It's rough out there. So I'm going to pretend for the next 5 or 6 minutes to be very scholarly and try and fill some. If I were a professor, I would say something like this. I would say, are there other examples we can learn from about what the WEXIT project is going to be met with? Well, what does Brexit teach us? I've paid some attention to that, and here's what I noted. Every political party in the UK was against Brexit. Now you might be saying, that's not true. The Conservative Party called the referendum. They said they were for it. Well, they never thought it would pass. They said they were for it just to let the air out of the balloon, expecting it to fail. And when they were shocked and it passed, they did everything to undermine it and delayed 3 years. So I say again, every political party was against it. And you can be sure that every political party would be against Brexit. They surely are. Just the same way they all claim to be against the bloc separatists. But actually, really, they're not really, are they? They're not really. They certainly give more time and attention to them than they do to Wexit, which they sneer at. The media was overwhelmingly hostile to Brexit. There were some pockets of the tabloid press in support, but the state broadcaster and all the legacy media were extremely hostile to it and mocked Brexiteers as dumb, dinosaur, blue-collar white guys. They even came up with new insults that we don't have on this side of the Atlantic. They came up with an insult, gammon, which is a type of ham. That's calling a blue-collar white guy gammon. They had a racial attack against Brexiteers. I know it sounds crazy, but look what they did. Big business, global businesses were universally against Brexit. Any globalist, the European Union, of course, they didn't want to lose part of it. They didn't want the dominoes to start to fall. And you can imagine if Alberta did leave, well, maybe Saskatchewan would want to go. Maybe parts of BC would, maybe other people would want a New Deal. So there's, just like Brexit emboldened Brexit-style parties across Europe, but you can imagine if Alberta got people thinking they could redo Confederation, where would it stop? Economists said, oh, it's going to be a recession, we're going to lose so many jobs, we're going to have no trade deals, no one will do trade with us. Really? Britain was the essential trading nation for centuries. They did trade quite well before the European Union, and they will do trade no matter what, but they were told there would be massive job losses. And the craziest thing, and I did a show on it, was the British Sandwich Association, which is naturally, I'm a member, actually claimed that if Brexit went through, there would be no more delicious sandwiches, because they rely on all those great ingredients from Europe. I'm not even kidding. They called it Project Fear. They actually called the Remain campaign Project Fear. Every single one of those things, with the possible exception of the Sandwich Association, I can see here. Okay, well, what's the Quebec template? If we've looked at Brexit, everyone was against it but the people, right? Well, what can we learn from Quebec? Well, they didn't succeed. And as Lorne suggested, maybe it's because they didn't want to succeed. Maybe they wanted the painful, endless trip to the dentist just to get endless concessions. Maybe they didn't want yes for an answer, because then they'd say, oh my God, what do we do now? But when I worked for Preston Manning 20 plus years ago, I was there right when the Bloc Québécois was in Parliament too, in almost equal numbers. And I met my counterpart, who was working for the leader of the Bloc. I was working for Preston, the leader of the Reform, and I met this great young guy, maybe you know him, Eric Duhem, who worked for Sheila. And we became friends. And over the years, I've stayed in touch with him. And one thing I learned from him was that Quebec put together, I'm going to call it an encyclopedia of how to separate. And it was a multi-volume series of scholarly studies covering every possible question. What currency do we use? What trade agreements? What do we do about the debt? What do we do about the army? What do we do for postage stamps? Like every possible practical question, they had this, because the Parti Québécois was the government in Quebec, they had the resources of the taxpayers' resources, they had bureaucrats, and they commissioned scholars. But I'm going to have to find the books, they're in French, but it's about this thick, every possible topic, because if you don't have an answer to those questions, any possible objection could derail your plan, your vision. And by the way, you don't need a perfect answer, you just have to start thinking about them. You have to show you're serious if you're serious. And the Parti Québécois, at least parts of it, really were serious. Another thing is they had proto-independence groups of people. They had definitely a popular culture, separatist intelligentsia, singers, folk musicians, songwriters, actors. In fact, I would say most Quebec artists were separatist. They had columnists, they had authors, they had cool people. I think they colonized most of the CBC, Radio Canada. They had student clubs, they had lawyers, they had, you could imagine all of these people taking their place in a new country. They were ready for it, pretty much. These are the elements, the building blocks that without them, there's no chance of independence if that is your goal. You can't just will it. You have to put in place the instruments. You have to think, what will it be like? And by the way, there are probably good answers to all those questions. One of the things I learned from Professor Gerard Lucician, if I'm saying that name, right, Gerard Lucician, who did a study for the Frontier Center in Public Policy the other day, he was talking about redrawing maps. And there was so much mockery in the CBC and the Toronto Star, because he actually took his hand at redrawing a map of Alberta and Saskatchewan. Everyone was, that's so silly. Well, he had maps in there showing how many times the provincial boundaries have been drawn and redrawn. There was a province called Keean. There was a province called Assiniboia. There was a dream that of Buffalo, Alberta and Saskatchewan both together. Of course, Rick Dolphin has Albumbia. But my point is, I think that you need to have people putting down on paper these ideas. And let me throw one more thing at you. And this is what I've learned from Donald Trump. You have to know how to negotiate. There has to be an or else. You and what army? And there's a test that we should all ask ourselves when we're really, really certain of things. And that test is there anything I could hear that would change my mind? Or am I so fanatic about something that no matter what facts change, I'll hold on to my ideas? It's a good test. You don't have to say it out loud, but just a gut check that you're still open to new ideas. And let me tell you what my checklist would be. If the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion were actually built and flipped on, if the carbon tax were repealed or moderated away in some way to make it meaningless, if the ban on tankers, C-48, was lifted, and if C-69 was pretty much ignored, I would have a tough time being as angry as I am. If Trans Mountain Pipeline really were built, but my point is, if a pig did fly, that would change your mind. And so I'm saying, what would be my list of things that would make me say, all right, if I am reasonable and if I was honest about what my grievances were, I'll calm down now. And it's my list.
Resignation.
But let me say what the list that I have heard being put forward by the Premier. Maybe we'll get out of the Canada Pension Plan, maybe we'll get out of the EI plan, maybe we'll get out of equalization, maybe we'll get our own RCMP replacement, and maybe we'll have other power. Hey, Professor Cooper, great to see you. Round of applause. We know it's been a tough journey. You've been getting the updates. I appreciate you soldiering on and getting up that highway too. Good to see you. I'll introduce you in just a moment, but take a minute and get settled and have a seat. It's great to see you. But back to my point. I told you what my list of persuasion points would be. I would be persuaded. If he actually built that pipeline through all the hippies in Vancouver, like if he actually did that, if he actually built the pipe, I have to say, oh, I'm surprised. And if he actually abated the carbon tax, I'd say, didn't expect that. If I'm being honest, and I think we should be honest, with ourselves at least, but are any of those in the offing? Are any of those being proposed? If the proposals are, I want our CPP, EI, RCMP, equalization, immigration, things of that, well, how does that solve any of my problems? Great, so I've got 200,000 unemployed people and I've got my own pension plan. Yeah, so does Detroit. I think you need an or else. I want these things or else. And if you're willing to take the or else off the table, then what are you? But a pundit. But a pundit.
You're a liberal.
Now I want to close on this, and then I see the professor some great notes. So I'm going to learn a lot tonight. We're going to learn a lot. No pressure. There will be two other reactions from the rest of Canada. There will be those who say, I don't like it, but I get it. And there will be those who are raging against this. There will be those right now who say, come on guys, stay. But they'll be fake goodwill and real goodwill. Real goodwill would be people say, okay, we've got some problems, we've got to actually fix them. But then there'll be so much more fake goodwill, these columns I've been referring to. Guys, you just have to transition off that oil economy. I think all of these things you have to think about, you have to game them out, you have to map them out. And if you don't do that, there's no chance that you're going to get the solution you need. And you gotta figure out what the or else is. You gotta figure out where the problems are. What's the nexus of the problem? Where is the problem? And you've gotta learn from whether it's Brexit or Quebec's example, because other people have been through this, including in other parts of the world. Czechoslovakia is no longer Czechoslovakia, and maybe they're happier for it. All right. I'm very, very pleased to introduce our special guest tonight, who has, it would have been just a quick flight in any other normal incidents, but you have spent half a day getting here, and I thank you for that. Professor Cooper is a scholar. He's a double honors degree in political science and history from UBC. He has two degrees from Duke University, including a PhD. He's a fourth generation Albertan. He's got Alberta in his blood, like Sheila. And he fights for Alberta all the time. He studies the classics, Greek political philosophy, things like that. But I think he's very much in the world. And he's very much thinking practically about the political problems of Alberta. And without further ado, and we're going to give you all your time in one lump. May I introduce to you Professor Barry Cooper.
Yeah, I'm terribly sorry I missed the first part. It's like Air Canada has never flown in the winter before. Actually, I blame the airport in Calgary. We had to wait. Once we were stuck on the damn plane, I couldn't get off. I was going to get off, and I only had Lorne's phone number, because maybe, who's go ahead without me. We got stuck on the plane, they closed the doors, and then they said we have to wait until we have room to de-ice. Now, de-icing, of course, is another novel concept. It hardly ever happens in the winter in Calgary or Edmonton. And there was a lineup of about 15 planes. So I was scheduled to get here about 5 o'clock. A long day. Warren and I were at a conference in Red Deer last weekend. And we agreed on most things. A lot of people there did, and some of you were probably there. One of the things that I didn't say that I didn't have an opportunity that seemed to be appropriate, but I may as well start off with it. I think in some respects, this is 1775, and we're looking for Thomas Jefferson. And as much as I like Jason personally, he's not it yet. I don't know whether he will be. I think that things can change. He's a politician, as is Premier Mo. And you remember what Ralph used to say, I want to see where the parade's going so I can get out in front of it and say I'm your leader and turn around and make sure they're still following me. That's a possibility. And Jason is, I think he's doing what he can, but he needs more encouragement. And Ezra is exactly right. If you don't have a hammer, nothing will get done. And what I said in Red Deer, and kind of what I'm going to say tonight, is that this is a structural problem that not just Alberta, but Saskatchewan and even Manitoba has faced since from before Confederation. My friend Ted Morton wrote a piece in the Herald a couple of weeks ago. He said, This is not episodic, it is structural. And what he meant by that is that there are certain political and economic and I would call them geopolitical realities in this country that have not changed since before Confederation. And I'd like to start off talking a bit about that because it puts things in a context that we generally don't wish to acknowledge. We think we can solve most problems. The Hudson Bay Company was incorporated in 1760, and it was incorporated as a plantation. This is, people generally never know that, but it was incorporated as a plantation under imperial British law. They came mostly through Hudson Bay. Sometimes the French came up the St. Lawrence drainage basin through the Great Lakes and so on. And they were looking for beaver, like everybody knows that, looking for fur. It's a renewable resource. There are many beaver left, but in principle it's renewable. There was conflict between Hudson Bay Company and the Northwest Company, and then there was a unification. And the imperial way of looking at Rupert's Land and the Northwest was there, this is the first thing, it was there from the beginning. There was a great University of Toronto historian, a guy named Donald Creighton, and he wrote a book called The Commercial Empire of the St. Lawrence. I can't quite remember the first paragraph, but it goes something like this. When in the course of a September day, the British finally wrested the rock of Quebec from the French, they set a foundation for an empire that would go from the river to the shining mountains. And that it almost became a motto. Well, it did, part of it became a motto on the coat of arms of Canada, Mare Usque Mare. And that's taken from Psalm, I've got to write it down here, Psalm 72, verse 8. And the rest of Psalm 72, verse 8, he shall have dominion from sea to sea and from the river unto the ends of the earth. And I remind you of that because we are the ends of the earth. And I remind you as well that when Creighton wrote that book, The Commercial Empire of the St. Lawrence, that was the river. But it was empire that mattered. It happened to be a commercial empire, but that's a big company, it's a commercial empire. All that had changed was that the rule came from what we now call Laurentian Canada, not from London. So basically and historically, the largest resource deposits have been in this part of the country, in the West. Since Confederation, the population has been chiefly in the St. Lawrence Valley, but the resources are still here. Federalism was supposed to reconcile this division of population and resources. And for many years, Westerners believed it. We worked through the major political parties, we worked through minor political parties, we worked through rebellious, disruptive political parties, and nothing worked. We tried. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And the reason that we failed is actually very simple. Laurentian Canada has never seen the West as part of the Federation. The Canadian Federation, so far as they're concerned, consists of Ontario and Quebec, the old colony of Canada, Canada East and Canada West, later Upper and Lower Canada. Atlantic Canada, the Maritimes, Newfoundland was never part of Canada, as you probably know, until 1949, but the Maritimes became subordinate to Canada within a generation after Confederation. And particularly in Ontario, there was a great book written about Nova Scotian history called The Neutral Yankees of Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia was invited to send delegates to Philadelphia. And what prevented them was the Royal Navy base at Halifax. The Brits wouldn't let them. So from the beginning, the relationship between Atlantic Canada and the old colony of Canada, Laurentian Canada now, was fraught. And we, in this part of the country, were never considered part of the deal. So when the ends of the earth were transferred from the Imperial Crown to the Crown and Right of Canada, with the transfer of Rupert's Land and the Northwest and Northeast Territories, and incidentally, it was not a purchase. Canada did not buy it from the Hudson Bay Company the way the Americans bought Alaska from the Russians. It was an internal imperial transfer. The 300,000 pounds went to pay for improvements that the Hudson Bay Company had made. Things like Fort Garry, things like the outposts, things like portages. So it wasn't a purchase. You often hear that it is, but this is, I would say, more Laurentian propaganda. So when we were transferred to the Crown and Right of Canada, the Northeast Territory, that no one ever remembers, was given to Quebec, and a large chunk of Rupert's Land was given to Ontario. And the rest was administered from Ottawa, quote, for the purposes of the Dominion. And a serious political scientist of an earlier generation, a guy named Jim Mallory, who taught at McGill for many years, wrote a book that I had to read as an undergraduate called Social Credit and Federal Power. And in that book, he said the provinces that were created from the old Northwest were provinces in the Roman sense. And when I read that, you know, as I was 19, I hadn't got a clue what he was talking about. I knew some Roman history, but I went to my Roman history prof and asked him, you know, what the hell did Mallory mean by that? And he smiled and he said, well, Roman provinces were conquered. They were conquered provinces. Think of Transalpine Gaul, but now France. It was conquered by Caesar. And it was administered by Roman governors. Or sometimes these provinces were administered directly from Rome. Now for us, in the West, that meant that the new Rome on the Rideau administered Rupert's Land and the Northwest Territories for its own purposes. In exchange for the privilege of being administered by Roman governors, they paid tribute, they paid taxes. That is how Laurentian Canada treated the West from the start. We are a Roman province. Our problem is that we see ourselves differently. We think we're part of a federation. We think we're not a province of the Laurentian Empire. We've forgotten that Sir John A. referred to the West as a crown colony. It's another technical term in British imperial law. What it meant was that crown colonies were administered from London. Sir John A. saw the West as a crown colony. Now, with Premiers Moe and Kenny, as I said, they are politicians. They're not creative statesmen. They're not the kind of people I think that we need. Premier Kenny has said, you know, and good on him, that Canada might leave the Canada Pension Plan. This is not a new idea. This has been around for about at least 25 years. It was part of the famous firewall letter that was signed, what, 18 years ago now? The important part of leaving the CPP is not that we will have a better plan than that the APP will be better, but that it would hurt Canada. That's the point of it. That's the entire point of it. To let Canadians and Laurentian Canadians know that they've been screwing us. And we don't like it. He said that we could also leave the employment insurance program. And the purpose of doing that would be exactly the same. We could do the same kind of program that Canada administers today, but Canada would have to pay more, and that would be good. And of course, we could get out of supply management milk from Quebec. That would hurt Quebec. The fact that, we probably have something equally economically irrational in Alberta is really secondary. Quebec, I think, produces something like, I don't know, is it 40–50% of food milk? It's a huge amount. And they consume about 17% of it. So where do you think the rest of it goes?
Not our cheese in Alberta, it's made in Alberta.
Yeah, exactly. He said that we might, he's mused about, as the Premier Kennedy mused about holding a referendum on Section 36(2) of the Constitution Act, dealing with equalization. Section 36 is not black letter law. Section 36 is filled with, quote, political principles and very ambiguous policy aspirations. And even more interesting, and this is hardly ever, Ezra will know about it because he's a graduate of the U of A Law School. It also depends on the spending power. The spending power has been declared by the Government of Canada. It has never been tested in court. And so far as I can tell, the only justification for it was, I don't even know if it's a joke, but Frank Scott, who's a professor of law at McGill and a founding member of the CCF, and a poet, he was a very interesting guy. Sometime in the late 1940s, I said, the Crown can give gifts to its subjects. That was the extent of the jurisprudential justification for the spending power. In other words, there isn't one, and no court has ever ruled on it. In other words, the equalization clause in the Constitution Act and its justification through the spending power is politics, all the way down. The legal side of it is completely insignificant. And in order to challenge that, all you need is leadership. And it goes a good deal beyond the firewall. Now, the other thing I was going to suggest, I guess I can continue this now, Ezra did. The Clarity Act is something that has been talked about regarding referenda on independence. It was passed by the Government of Canada in response to a reference to the Supreme Court of Canada by the Government of Canada. And basically the simple version is a clear majority on a clear question ensures that Canada has the duty to negotiate in good faith with the province, declaring that it wants independence. And John Major, who was a member of the court then, is a friend of one of my lawyer pals in Calgary. And this guy asked Major, what do you think a clear majority and a clear question are? And he looked at him, he said, funny little guy, he said, if we'd have known that, we'd have told you.
I know it.
They haven't got a clue. But what they did say is that it is up to Parliament, the Government of Canada, to decide whether a question is clear, like, do you want to be independent? And a majority is clear, say 95%. They can say, in their wisdom, those are not clear questions, that is not a clear majority. So it's up to the Government of Canada and then who's going to enforce their duty to negotiate? There's no enforcement. to make them. So the Clarity Act and things with that seems to me are a false hope that the lawyers sometimes will hold out. Again, what is required is political leadership, not reliance that you can trust Parliament to do its duty. And then there are other things. The Government of Canada can disallow referenda legislation or reserve it for the attention of the Governor General. They haven't done that. They haven't used the reservation, I think, since the 1960s. They haven't used disallowance since the 1940s. But they could. And I would bet you if push came to shove, they would. So, again, the only response that makes any sense, to me anyway, is a political one. It's not legal, and it's not really one of federalism. The whole point about independence is it ends federalism. And it ends it for the perfectly good reason that it has never worked for us. Not from the start, and not now.
Thanks, Professor. I had said that we were going to go through a second round of our panelists, but I want to get you involved. So I would like to get questions from the floor. Sheila and Riley have mics. Now, I really do want to hear what you have to say, but please allow me to cut you off after 30 seconds if you don't make a point. It's not that I don't want to hear you, it's that I want to hear the guy and the gal next to you too. And I will do my best to keep the answer brief too. So we'll start with Sheila and then we'll go to Holly. So Sheila, I recognize Danny. Go ahead, Danny.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Ezra. I'm Danny. I was one of the organizers at the conference in Red Deer on the weekend that you so graciously mentioned. As you know, I think Sheila was there, Keean was there. We've had 7 conferences. Sheila's been at 6 of them. And the only reason anyone has heard of them is thanks to you and to now True North. So I just wanted to thank you for covering what we're doing, trying to get the message out. At our conference, we decided we had 4 things that we wanted done. You listed it in your thing. What we concluded was we should set a date for voting on separation and then work backwards from there. So the people that wanted to get rid of the tanker ban, get rid of the no pipeline ban, fix equalization, start typing their own CP, work backwards from that. The people who want to save the country can see that they get it done. My question is to Barry Cooper. Please, one of the suggestions that came up was, you talk about it's maybe not legal, but it could be done. One of the suggestions was, we said, roughly speaking, we have 100,000 people in Alberta getting a check from the Alberta government, say $4,000 a month of payroll, federal income tax payable. What would be wrong? I know what would be wrong, it would be illegal, but why couldn't the Alberta government just say to Canada, that $400 million a month that we send down there for federal income tax, we're going to start putting it in trust till these other issues have been dealt with.
Well, you named what was wrong with it. It's completely illegal. And again, it would take political will, and it would take a very defiant premier, plus the support of an overwhelming number of Albertans. I think it could be done, but it would take those conditions, I think, in order to actually make it work.
Thanks. Holly?
My name is Reid. I live in Edmonton. I believe that Sir John N. Macdonald burned the bridge to the prairies. So, can we trust them? Have we ever been able to trust them? Central Canada, or you call Laurentian Canada.
Lorne, you want to take a crack at that one?
called the Frontier Oil Sands Project. It's going to come up before Trans Mountain does. It's currently in its final week of public comments. Of course, all the public comments that are being made about it are from activist groups funded by big billionaires in the United States who want to landlock our oil sands. But it's worth $20 billion, so it's worth double or maybe almost triple what Trans Mountain is. The company behind it has done all of its environmental work, it's done all of its relations with indigenous people in the area, it has everything signed off. But it will require cabinet approval at the federal level. Federal and provincial regulators have both signed off on it as well, but it will require the federal government, the federal cabinet to say yes to it in February. So before we get too much more activity on Trans Mountain, we'll know whether the Frontier project is going to go ahead or not. And that will be an indication of whether we can trust them. My guess is that instead, the Prime Minister, who said, of course, on election night that he wanted to stand with the people. I'm guessing instead we'll get about a $3 billion project from Ottawa to retrain us all to work in fair trade, organic, pour-over coffee shops. Because that's how we'll transition.
Hi there, my name is...
Go ahead, question.
My name is Dylan Michaels. I just wanted to ask, hey Peter, it's been a little while. How many flights of stairs did you threaten to, oh no, it was out the window you threatened your wife with? And Ezra, I'm still waiting for that lawsuit for shutting your princess event down.
All right, a bit of an incoherent, but free speech. Ladies and gentlemen, free speech. You know, give me 1 minute, Sheila. Give me 1 minute on this. I'm not sure who that guy was. I didn't catch his name. Boy, is he in for a surprise. Because, you know, literally in 18 minutes, we're putting a video up announcing that on Thursday, I filed a lawsuit here at the Court of Queen's Bench in Edmonton against everyone who pressured the Princess Theatre into council. That's not what we're here to talk about, but his last comment was, I'm waiting for the lawsuit. I don't know if you heard that. Well, buddy, I think the process server is waiting for you at your house. I don't know who that guy's name is, but I get the feeling that him and I are going to get to know each other a little bit better than he wants to. My point is you can't shut us down, you can't deplatform us. They bullied the Princess Theatre. In law, that's called inducing a breach of contract. And I don't know his name, but there are 12 people we've named, plus a bunch of John Does. Let me say this. The WEXIT debate, like every other controversy in Canada, ought to be debated. And together, as friends and neighbors and citizens, we will resolve the debate. And some people will win and some people will lose, and will accept the outcome. But we will not allow deplatformers. And by the way, he's very welcome to come here and be a little snitty and pay his $15. All right, thank you. I just wanted to say that. He'll be a little bit surprised because no more deplatforming, not on my watch. Not on my watch. All right, who's question now? Holly?
My name is Lance. This is a question for either Dr. Cooper or Mr. Bexte, depending on each of your own experience. Let us assume a situation where a referendum were held across the prairies that was fair and open and a clear majority decided in favor of independence, and then that effort was blocked or obfuscated by Ottawa. What reaction should we expect from the United States?
That is the question that when I discussed this in Red here, that no one except Machiavelli has thought about. In chapter 12 of the Prince, he said, good arms make for good laws, and without good arms, you'll never have good laws. We have no arms. So we're going to have to call on our friends in the United States to help us. They don't have to actually land at Cold Lake with the garrison, but they certainly have to have a word in the ear of the Prime Minister to tell him that the patricians stay in their barracks until this is over. And as happened with discussions prior to the Quebec referendum, the Van Deus, for example, the expectation was that they would become the Army of Quebec. Well, similar things we can say with respect to, say, the patricians here. Now, this is important because we have things that the Americans would be interested in. Cold Lake is the third largest air base in the world. Wainwright is pretty good size. What's the one down here? Suffield is a good size. The Brits train there all the time. And we also have a strategic petroleum reserve for the entire continent. So I think they'd be interested. I think they would, this is a very dangerous thing. Machiavelli warns us as well about relying on guys who have bigger armies than you do. But I don't think we have a choice. And after all, the Americans, in the unpleasantness that led to the founding of the United States, had to rely on the French. And the French went home after the Revolutionary War was fought. And we could expect the Americans to do the same thing. Now, whether they would or not, of course, is a different matter, but we could certainly make it our expectation. And if the patricians became the Army of Alberta, that'd be kind of cool.
I know you didn't ask for my point of view, but I'm going to steal 30 seconds. In one single tweet, Donald Trump got all of Greenland and Denmark talking about would Trump take that over. And it's not an insane idea. It was proposed by Truman. The Chinese were looking to get in there. Trump was moving against them. And by the way, I think a lot of Greenlanders would have liked it. A single tweet by Donald Trump showing his covetousness for our land and people and wealth. Maybe it takes someone else to show some interest in us, to raise the stakes. Maybe all it takes is a tweet. Sheila.
Hi, Ezra, I'm a member. You were talking about restructuring of borders. I think the largest restructuring of borders has occurred since World War II when multiple nations signed the UN Global Compact on Migration, erasing borders around the world.
And is that for anyone in particular? We sent two journalists to the Global Compact on Migration in Marrakesh, Morocco. And I believe that Rebel News is the singular reason why anyone in Canada even discussed that subject and why the Conservative Party finally came out against it. No one else even read it, let alone questioned it. It created a right for foreigners to immigrate to Canada. The words rights are in there dozens of times. The word sovereignty, if I recall, is in there just once. It's an incredible document. And I say again, Quebec has some control over its immigration, and Alberta does not. Holly?
My name is Tim McGee. I was thinking late last night, and I did an email to the Fraser Institute, and I asked them if they would do a blueprint to take Western Canada out of Confederation. I asked them for a price and timing, and I gave them the undertaking that as a private citizen, and that's all I am, I would do my best to get the fundraising done and have enough of it put aside before they started that we could continue with it. So I'm looking for anybody out there that would be experienced in anything like that. So if they come back to me and say, yes, we do it, and here's the cost, that we can get started on it right away.
See, that's the kind of practical thinking. In the UK, they had research groups. In Quebec, they had this encyclopedia I mentioned. Because you can't beat something with nothing. The other side will have their facts or fake facts. You need to have done your homework in advance. And maybe it's a professor at one of our universities. Maybe it's a retired professor who isn't worried about losing, his status. And I know I'm stealing more time, but let me say one more thing. And it reminds me of what I said about Keean. To be a truly great reporter, you have to look a political power in the eye and ask them something that you know will make them hate you for the rest of your life. And you've done that. And the thing is, it sounds like a joke, but it's true. When you asked Darren Billis about, his wife's sworn affidavit about his drug use, he'll hate you for the rest of his life. And most reporters simply will not do that because they want to be friends with power. They want access to power, either for a scoop, a tip, or just to be invited to the Christmas party, or they don't like conflict. Whoever will stand hard for WEXIT will incur irrevocable wrath. And although there were so many sympathizers to Reid Levant and Lucien Bouchard, etc., they were also hated deeply and forever, including by some people who might otherwise have been their friends. And so you will not find most politicians willing to lead it. You won't find people of a bureaucracy, which an academy is. You won't find people who have a lot of retail pressure points on them. You'll find mavericks. You'll find independently wealthy people who don't give a damn. Because anyone else will be attacked in the most stunning and vicious way. And Peter, you had a little taste of that here tonight. You will incur a wrath that you have never known before. And so most journalists, most professors, most politicians will stay miles away, even if they're secretly sympathetic. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Guy Fraser, and my question is, if Parliament were to reject a clear question with a clear majority of votes, is there an extra-national organization or entity such as the UN or the Queen that could intervene on Canada's or on Alberta's behalf?
No, not really. But I'm quite sure there really isn't. Canada is one of the darlings at the United Nations, so and the United Nations works in a way that very few people seem to understand. It doesn't make, like the Migrant Pact, it can't enforce that. Joe Stalin was once told the Pope was mad at him, and Stalin said, how many divisions does the Pope have? Because the Pope has no divisions, he had nothing. Same thing with the UN. The UN has no divisions, it has no black helicopters. What it relies on is its member states to enforce things. So you go to a United Nations conference and you send a delegation that Trudeau thinks is really great, and they go there and they pass some stupid resolutions, and then they come back and Trudeau says, oh my goodness, well I know this isn't going to be popular here in Canada, but the UN is making us do it. The UN isn't making anybody do anything. The UN is effectless, it's useless, and if you go to if we have to go extra-national, no, there really aren't that many places we can go. But one thing, and I think Barry's right, we might have to look to the Americans to help us with arms, although I'm guessing that there are enough guns owned by people who are but the other thing is, yes, the Canadian Army isn't just made up of Albertans, but there are an awful lot of people from other provinces who are in the Canadian Army who I think could easily be persuaded to stay in their barracks and not move out of Alberta if there was an independence vote. I remember when we were doing some work back in the 90s covering the talk of an Alberta police force to get out from under the RCMP and the firearms control. The survey we paid for it, about 60% of Mounties would have switched over to an Alberta Provincial Police force right away. So like, I don't think we can say that just because a soldier isn't from Alberta, they won't be sympathetic to what we're up against, particularly if Parliament were to try and nullify an independence vote. But I would like you all to keep me in mind as the commander of the Alberta Navy.
And I would like to be the ambassador to Antarctica. Holly, is there a question down there?
Kind of a two-part question. If we were to separate, how would the national debt affect us? And what about all our premiums we've paid into CPP up till now?
Professor, do you want to take a crack at that?
There was an article in the Roughneck magazine, I think it was early October, maybe late September. And that was one of the issues that this anonymous but very well-informed person who was interviewed dealt with. And he said basically the amount of money that Canada would owe us is so much higher that we have to worry about how Canada is going to pay us off. And this has to do with the stability of Canadian currency. Because without Alberta, the Canadian dollar really does become a northern peso. The proposal that this guy came up with is worth considering. He said we'll do a land for debt swap. And the land is everything north of Hope. And he thought that would be a pretty good deal.
Sheila.
My question is about the referendum, but it's on the people that are not here. And like I believe if there was a vote, we would separate. But there's so many people that don't have the information. So can we have some editorial section in either the Western Standard, can you get that? Or just somewhere where people can go to and get information on a scenario, like a chart flow, like how we're saying here, if something bad happened and we have to call in the U.S. to help us, just a flow chart, just something to let people know so there's no fear,
Keean's going to take a crack at this.
I'll buy a Rebel newspaper.
I just started a Rebel newspaper. Well, I'm trying to do that every day of my job, is that I'm trying to share the other side of the story and make sure that there's some coverage in some way that is unbiased. But when and I didn't get your name, when you mentioned, can we have editorials? Well, who writes editorials? It's people like you. You should be writing letters to the editor. You should be doing everything you can to be advocating the position that you believe in. Because when you are the silent majority, you're silent, you're ineffective. I think that the best thing that anyone in this room can do is be vocal. That's going to be the
Sheila's mic. Oh, no, it's Holly's mic, sorry.
Hi, Kevin Price, Alberta born and raised, gun lover, and I guess I follow a lot more of the U.S. politics than Canada, a lot. But regarding what Sheila was saying regarding the Texas economy and the unemployment rate and all the rest, and then the other arguments or not arguments, but thoughts of what would we use for our currency, what would we use for all the things that come with separation. Is it not another option to Trump 2020.
Well, there are countries around the world that use the American dollar. I think Panama does, if I'm not mistaken, and it's a de facto currency in many other countries. Of course, oil is typically bought and sold in American dollars. I think that someone's got to start putting the meat on the bones, and we can't just say someone who. Well, I think Keean's right. It has to be diffuse, and there has to be different, and there will be different strains, different opinions. But it's got to start, because otherwise any of these things could be an insuperable objection. I think the energy here could be dissipated if there's no champion for the project. And that's hard, because then that's a person you have to put some trust in. And like I say, you're not gonna, I mean, it's not gonna be Jason Kenny. He didn't, that's the one thing he's ruled out, and some would say he's even keeping his eyes on the big prize in Ottawa. Who would it be?
Red Wall.
I think at the end of the day, I mean, you said you needed Thomas Jefferson, you're right, but you do sort of need a George Washington. And I have no idea who that would be. I think a lot of the institutions that control the conversation in Alberta have their roots in other parts of the country or even in the world. And they, like the banks in Britain, will be against WEXIT and Bexte. And it will be, and if they actually, imagine when the rest of Canada actually wakes up to what they would lose. They would do anything to keep anything from smearing in the media. That's the obvious part. To imagine the skullduggery and the trickery. You want to see the deep state get ready for the moves that would be tried to keep Alberta in. This Bloc Québécois leader and the Premier Legault, who says, oh, we subsidize the rest of Canada. I think they know that's not true. But when Quebecers wake up to the fact that that is true and Alberta is almost out the door, there will be a rage and a reaction. And I don't know, I think things are still so soon. It's not even 1 month since the election. Lorne has said if it happens, it's going to happen quickly. Could be. But there's so many people who could throw a wrench into things to put it off course. Sorry, that was a ramble muddle from me. Let's get back to short, sharp questions and answers.
Hi, my name is Chris Goldberg, Gilbert, born and raised. I have a question, basically a statement to you. The Marxist infiltrated the education system a long time ago. They threw God out of the school, replaced it with Marxism, socialism. Now you look at the younger generation, they're all spineless, weak, emotionally crippled, soy boys, and it's like, how do we go about fixing the education system and if Alberta separates? Can we like make a new curriculum and just throw all the Marxist in?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. There is a serious problem in our education system. Thankfully, it's something that's controlled largely by the province, so I would direct that to Jason Kenny and hope that he has an answer to that. It looks like he is working on changing the curriculum a little bit. I'd give you some of my experience from university, from high school, but it would probably make you sick. These people, these teachers, and some of them are great, some of them are not so great. But when it comes to public institutions in secondary schools, I mean, it's rigged against conservatives. Conservatives are constantly deplatformed. They're constantly threatened with getting kicked out of school. I know I was taken to the dean's office more than once for some things that we were saying on free speech walls and whatnot. So yeah, I think that there needs to be a change in how we're educating our students and make sure that we don't succumb to the Marxists. Now, I also want to point out, Sheila's right over there. She has a mic, and she was very smart to go in the line up there over there to hand the mic to people. But if you have any questions for her, she has quite a few kids, and I'm sure she has an experience with some Marxist teachers herself. So feel free to ask her some questions. We wouldn't want her getting away without answering them.
I'm actually pretty lucky. My daughter, who's working hard on the desk over there, Mom's watching. She has we go to a tiny rural Catholic school, and yes, it is the politician's job, I guess, to make sure that the will of the people is being done as far as the education system goes. But it's also your job. I know we're all busy, I know we all have lives, but I'm a big fan of the pop-ins at school. They never know when I'm gonna show up, they never know what kind of questions I'm gonna ask. It's on us to, like, the Marxism in our education system didn't happen overnight, it crept in and we let it happen. And so if it's gonna come out, don't look to politicians to fix it, it's up to you.
This question came up in Red Deer, and it's not as bad as everybody fears. It's bad. No, it's bad. It's bad. I mean, most of my colleagues would be surprised, I'm sure, to see me here. Maybe they wouldn't. I don't know. But I can tell you, I teach a course to first-year students on ideology. And I have found that they are as interested in reality and the truth as any set of students I've taught, and that goes back for about, I don't know, 40 years. The ideologies that we look at, they're legacy ideologies, liberalism, and so on. But the ones that really get their attention are environmentalism and feminism. And those kids, like the little Greta, have been so abused by their teachers that they're so happy to actually get some facts that they kind of develop a taste for it. They're as good as any students, you know, including students of my generation and your generation. So it's not always as bad. You just have to have people who are willing to give them facts. I mean, one of the things, for example, the 97% consensus of scientists is a complete hoax. It's utterly non-existent. They were fascinated to find this out because they'd been told that this was true ever since they were about grade 6. And I have them read Tim Ball's book on anthropogenic climate change. I mean, I know Tim. He's a real scholar. They think Al Gore is a scientist. A couple of years ago, I asked for a show of hands. Said, is there anybody in the class who's not seen the Al Gore film? And one girl was sitting right here, put her hand up. And I said, do you know who Al Gore is? And she said, no, who's Al Gore? And I said, where did you go to high school? And she said, Hong Kong. And that told me just about everything I needed to hear. So, but nevertheless, they still wanted to understand reality. I mean, students today are just as interested in reality as they always were.
Sorry, can I just add to that for a second? Epstein didn't kill himself.
I want to add a pessimistic note. It wasn't anyone in Toronto or Ottawa who made mention of the premier. And the reason I say that is there are many problems that are not rooted here or there, but they're global. You touched on some of them. We'll still have the media culture, the pop culture. We'll still have so many problems that come from people, simply changing certain constitutional jurisdictions will not solve every problem. But I think a lot of things are easier to solve when the decisions are made more locally and when you got an extra 20 billion kicking around here. All right, now it's 8:09. I propose we take 3 more questions, and I'm sorry, I know there's more people lined up than that, but I'm not sure how long we have the room for it. I know some people want to wrap up. But I propose we take 3 questions, and then we give every panelist, including Sheila, just a 1 minute, what was the thing you learned? I learned something, or I think I figured a small thing out I'm going to share. So I'd like all the panelists to come up with a 1 or 2 minute thing. Let's take 3 questions. And then Sheila, I'm going to invite you back up to be part of the summary, and then we'll break, and I know we've got some gear outside for those who want a hat or a shirt or something. And I want to say thanks again to everybody for coming out tonight. So let's take 3 more questions. Which side should we start? Over there, Holly?
Lyle Nicholson. This is more for the professor. The Roman provinces, when they got their freedom from Rome, that was a rather bloody affair. I can't see Ottawa or Eastern Canada letting us go without a fight. What do you think the chances are we're going to have to fight for our independence?
About 100%.
How many here are willing to stand up and take a rifle?
My rifle speaks French.
Carry one for the government, I'll carry one for my province.
My name is Leo McGarvey. I was a sergeant in the military. I spent 38 years in the military, and I've seen Pierre Trudeau, once became Prime Minister in 1968, he destroyed the military. He cut our military from 120,000 to 60,000. Then he started destroying the military further, asking people to take their retirement early. And he just kept on going like that. Correction took over, he destroyed part of the military, he disbanded the airborne regiment. And now we got the situation now, history repeats itself if you don't pay attention to it. Back in 1988, I met with Reform Party people at a mall, and I asked him, I'd like to get rid of Mulroney just got elected, and he was doing exactly what Trudeau was doing, screwing the West, although he was voted in from the West. And then he just repeated it. Then Reform Party was here, and I got posted in New Brunswick. They had the Core Party there. They were getting screwed down there by the same people. People who were getting out of school that were English couldn't get jobs in New Brunswick because they didn't speak French. Same thing was happening everywhere else. So, but I went down to Nova Scotia this year, and I door knocked with the Conservative Party down there. And I found out the young people down there don't listen to the news like out here. So you don't see too many young people here. They don't listen to the news. They don't know what's going on in their own province. That's why now the Liberals are back in, because they didn't know the Liberal history. Trudeau, when he was a young university student, running up and down the dock in 1939 when the troop ships were loading up to go over across the Atlantic Ocean, running for this U-boats. My Uncle M said Trudeau was running up and down the dock on his motorbike with a German Helvetica Swastika flag and waving it around. And he said if we had bullets in our gun, we would have saved old Canada. A lot of problems way back then, but we didn't have bullets.
I agree. Do you want to put a question to the folks here, or I appreciate you telling us those stories?
Well, yeah, I looked at what's going on in Canada here. Now, we're always giving money to Quebec, but we don't know how many billions of dollars Quebec is getting from Churchill Falls and Ear Falls selling electricity to the United States. And they call themselves a have-not, but they're making more money in electricity than we were on oil.
Well, they've got a surplus this year, too. We've discovered they've got a surplus. It's not a surplus. Holly, question on that side.
Yes, I just want to reiterate what Ezra alluded to earlier, and that is it's time for a plan. We've got the first phase anger handled in spades. And to that end, I'd like to suggest that, I'd like to ask the panelists if any of them have read an essay online by a retired military, a man called Peter Letourneau. His webpage is The Polite Separatists. And in that essay, he outlines the nuts and bolts, the how-tos. The professor alluded to the settling of accounts. We don't need to worry about who owes who when we pull this deal. So we're ready for a plan, and I want to know if any of the panelists have read that, A Better Way by Peter Letourneau online.
Has anyone seen it? Did you say the phrase polite separatist? Is that a phrase used? I thought that's a pretty good phrase. I've never been called polite in my life. But, all right, last question on this side, and then we'll have the 2-minute wrap up by everybody, 1.5 minute wrap up, and oh, okay.
Thank you very much, friends. My name is Keean, and this question may be a question to the panel and also to the audience as well. Now, I know this is an event for Alberta separation narrative, but also many of us and all of us actually resonate with the basic Canadian narrative as well. So there's no harm, I guess, putting this out as well. And I sadly see the absence of politics, whether it's yellow vest movements, whether it is the separatist movements, which are right and resonate with the separatists because we fed up with it. Because, in fact, I call them the Ottawa supremacists, that they don't talk to us. And that's the reason we are actually so fed up as Albertans that this has happened. But the politicians in any of these events are sadly missing all over Canada. So whether it's the Conservative Party or the newer startup parties or whoever. So I think they need to be seen more and more because they are our reps. And I made a little meme when I said in elections, they beg for our votes, and after the elections, we beg for our rights from them.
Well, that phrase, Ottawa supremacists, that's a very powerful phrase. I thank you, and I thank you for coming to the book event last month when we were kicked out of the Princess Theater. I thank you for being there, and a number of folks were here too. All right, well, it's 8:15, and we'll start at that end, Keean, and we'll work our way down here. So Keean, and then Sheila, and then Lorne, and then Professor Cooper, and then I'm gonna have a 90-second wrap-up. Yeah. I want to say thanks to everybody for coming tonight. And we're just starting to work our way through this issue, aren't we? But would you agree with me that the people on this panel were here in good faith and have put their heart into this, and I'm proud to be associated with that issue. So thank you. Is there anything you heard today or learned today that you want to remark on, or anything that if there was one message you wanted to say today, that it would be?
I learned a lot. I'm excited to read that article that fella said a better way. I'm excited to read on that. And I want to thank everyone who came here today to listen to what Professor Barry Cooper and all the folks here on the panel had to say. And the questions that you asked us were intelligent questions, and they're important questions that have to be asked. So I think you'll deserve a round of applause for coming out here. I think that this movement is at a point where there's still a lot of questions that have to be answered, and there's a few things that I think that we need to be prepared to do, and it means holding referendums that might be uncomfortable. It's speaking truth to power even though it might be uncomfortable. It's just things that have to get done because nobody else is going to do it. Now, I have to say, because I didn't say it in my opening speech, there's a few options on what we could do. We could, sit on our hands and accept what Ottawa is giving us. We could separate and become our own province. We could join with Saskatchewan and do the same. We could become the 51st state. But, it's my opinion, and I don't know where the room stands on this, but I'm not a traitor. And I think that it is important that whatever we do, we remain a constitutional monarchy, and we're not traitors to the Queen. I think that I'm a monarchist until the day I die, and we can
You're a colonist! You're a colonist!
But these are questions that have to be answered, and decisions we have to make together. I'm a monarchist, maybe you're not. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. And Sheila, what do you have to say?
I'm not going to talk about the Queen, I think. Not that I don't like her, I'm just not talking about her. I think the longer I sat here and listened to everybody talk, a lot of people on this panel are quite a bit smarter than me and more thoughtful. And it's hardening off my opinion on where we need to go next. And when Keean pointed out the injustice of the Senate with Alberta's amount of senators versus, I did some quick research, PEI has 4 senators. 4. Do you know how the population of PEI? No, Red Deer plus Blackballed. That's it. So for me, until those issues are fixed, until the fact that Toronto and Montreal together are 33 MPs. How many Conservative MPs are in Alberta, folks? 33. They cancel us out. It's over before it gets to us. Until that changes, nothing else changes. And unlike Ezra, Ezra is happy to be a caged bird, happy and singing a song. Because he said, if the government gives us back TMX, cancel C69, C60, or C48, and the carbon tax, until such time as we do that, maybe that'll placate our anger. That doesn't really change anything, and it puts us all back here 30 years later. Again, I remain willing to be convinced that there's some other reason other than just nostalgia to stay. And I learned something else today, guys. Despite what Tristan Hopper said about you, you're not the dumbest movement in Canada. I saw some great questions, got a great panel. Pretty intelligent bunch, don't believe the mainstream media.
I remember that on the eve of the Alberta provincial election, Tristan Hopper protected an NDP majority. One of the things I've learned from tonight, and also from the last 6 weeks or so since the election, and 4 weeks, because I've been on an awful lot of interviews with Central Canadian and Eastern Canadian media. And the thing that I think is different this time than, say, 1982 after the national is there are more people from what we would call the elites who are now resigned to the fact that Alberta needs to go. I could walk, for the last 40 years, I could walk out into any field at Coronation, Alberta, and ask the guy on the tractor whether or not he was in favor of leaving. And he'd probably think about having it, and say, yeah, sure, I bet. But it was in the law offices and the doctors' clinics and the academic towers and things where there was resistance to the idea of Alberta independence, and there always will be, because those people, their incomes and lives are fairly prosperous the way things are. So you don't want to change things if you've got things are working for you. But there are so many more people from big companies and academics and professionals who now have just said, it's over, I'm done. And so we do need to have the cultural backbone if we're going to make this go. And I think that it's there if it's responsible.
And just to underline what Lorne said, most of the people I talk to are polite independentists in Calgary, and these guys are they saw what happened with Canada. They know that what's going to happen with their company. A guy named Dave Yeager, who's basically runs a service company, brother's service company. He would say to these guys, and they're almost all men, as you know. Okay, you got a $5 million company now, and you want to stay, and you're a little worried. What if it's worth $500,000? How do you feel now? What if it's worth 50? What if it's worth 5? So there's a breaking point for all of these people, whatever their connections to Houston or to Toronto, to finance, they all have a breaking point, and it's most of them when you can't quite see tumbleweed going down the streets of Calgary, but there's an awful lot of empty space there that people have noticed, and I think this really is a difference. I mean, it's not just sort of Edmonton, Calgary, that old stuff. That's the first thing I've noticed. You guys are a little more rowdy than the guys in the big towers. The second thing is, Canada is, you remember that when Quebec wanted to leave and came so close?
Yeah.
Why didn't they? I can remember Dave Berkison and I wrote a book called Deconfederation of Canada Without Quebec. And that second referendum, we went to watch the results come in the student union building. And we thought, my God, they're gonna go, they're gonna go. And we were just so happy. And then the we love you, Quebec, please don't go. That's not gonna happen with us. It will make it much easier, I think. There will be not a great outpouring of sympathy and understanding and we love you, Alberta. That ain't gonna happen.
You're right. Brett Wilson, for example, very wealthy man, was working on the Dragons Den, sort of cool dude in a way. He feels like a almost artist, doesn't he? Quebec has a lot of folk singers, but there's a lot of country singers out west here, whether it's Paul Grant or even Brad Wall's son, Walter Wall. Yeah, well, maybe Nickelback. I don't know if they have a lot of ties anymore, but I think it's important to have those feelings, the aesthetic side, the emotional side, because as we've heard a few times today, the counterweight here is the sentimentality. When you're in a comfortable relationship, you can put up with a lot of things because to get a divorce after 114 years, well, what's it like out there? I know the devil, I know, but what's it like out there? That's a sentimental, it's an emotional reaction, whereas a lot of the reasons to leave are the logical reactions. So unless there's that emotional side, and that's going to be tough because the whole world's going to hate you hard. I think that there needs to be, and I know this sounds very bookish of me, but I think there needs to be a quarterly journal of WEXIT type ideas. Not monthly, not weekly. It's not a newspaper, but once a quarter, maybe a 60-page thing with a bunch of 5-page essays. Someone who wants a monarchy, someone who wants a republic, someone who wants to be like Puerto Rico. Someone like it can be a thoughtful, not rushed thing, written maybe by a professor in one case, by a lawyer in another, maybe someone from outside the jurisdiction. I think we need to start hammering these things out, working these things out, because I just think we need that, to have the depth. When you look at Brexit, it was decades in the making. Farage, how many years did he fight? And finally the moment came, and he had all the arguments, and he was known, and the people were ready for it. And Quebec, it didn't just happen. I actually think that if a referendum were put on a clear question, it would not pass. Because what would the question be that could muster a support? And how easy would it be to come up with objections that people would say, oh yeah, I never thought of that. I think a referendum today would fail. I think what I know, and I'll close on this, is that we need to have these safe places, to use a lefty term, to talk about this, where people aren't going to jump down your throat and call you names because you have a legitimate grievance. Let me close. If some of you got my email the other day, I promised I'd tell a story from high school, so let me tell it quickly. When I was in high school, I think I was 14 or 15, René Levant, the leader of the Parti Québécois, came to Calgary on a book tour. And I went to Western Canada High School, and just a block away, there was a bookstore right there. And he was having a book signing at lunchtime, right there. And I was 14, and I was a separatist. And I had just done a social studies project on Western separatism. And I went to the book launch over lunch. And I asked him, I said, Mr. Levant, what do you think about Western separatism? and I'm going to disappoint you. He said, I don't know. It wasn't even I don't know. It was, what on earth are you possibly talking about? And I thought, how could you not have something to say? I thought maybe he didn't want to stir the pot. That was my reaction, my memory of what I thought as a 14-year-old. He didn't want to, I was being provocative. No. He is a walking provocation. I mean, he wasn't doing it, he wanted to sell some books, but it's that for him, it was all the people, the ethnicity, his people. He was the Moses. And it was unthinkable. What are you talking about, Western separatism? You're not a people. You don't have a mission. You don't have a shared dream. What is your shared story? And so, 30 years after that moment, I think I understand why he couldn't even understand the question. Because for him, Western separatism, Quebec separatism was his people, like the Jewish people 2,000 years in exile, getting the state of Israel. For him, it was the French nation in North America, 400 years in exile, would have their own place. And there was a tremendous sense of community, forged by decades of grievances, real or imagined. And everyone who shaped that society said, this is where we're going. I didn't quite get there. I look at Hong Kong in these last weeks, I see a Hong Kong identity being forged. A common story, a common battle, common beliefs, willingness to pay a price. There is a Hong Kong identity today that wasn't there a year ago. And I believe now, after thinking about it, the reason René Levesque couldn't even understand my question is because my question would be based on this mathematics or this ratio of senators. That's not how he even thought. He was pure history and the echoes of French language through the centuries was what he was. And that is not here yet. And if you seek to unhook yourself from the sentimentality of saying, oh, Canada every day in school when you were a kid, and loving Canada for generations, you will not give that up until you know what the new thing is and it feels as much of a family as Canada does. So that's my anecdote to close the day. I want to thank you very much for coming. Professor, thank you for persevering. I know you've got to go pretty quick to get this guy back down. Lorne, Gunter, thank you very much for being here. Sheila, Gunn,